Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Before we get started with the actual course content, I'm actually going to give you guys a little bit of a run through of both the way that the webinars are done and give people a chance to get signed in, and hopefully we won't miss out on anybody that was trying to participate today. So we do have a new app that we launched in December. It is the MLS Touch app. This is a replacement for any of the previous apps that you guys might have been using to view any of the MLS data while you guys were out on the road. So for instance, if you were using Tulsa MLS or MLS Tech, this is the official replacement for it. So MLS Touch is actually a app that takes all of the data from both Matrix and Realist that we can provide it and dumps it into a mobile format. So there are some limitations to what it can search for and what information it can provide, but it is an especially useful tool if you guys are out on the road and you guys need to look for something in Matrix. It's a heck of a lot easier than having to pull up Matrix on your phone, zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, or use the mobile version of Matrix, which is very oversimplified. So it's a fantastic tool. It links to your GPS. It has two-way sync between a lot of information in Matrix. I would strongly recommend it. So when you guys are searching for it, make sure that you're looking for MLS-Touch, and that should find the right one. Oh, and actually also, we do have a, let me find out when that was. Oh, yeah, a mobile agent class that's actually going to be covering the MLS Touch app, at least in part, next Monday, or Tuesday, excuse me, next Tuesday on the 13th. All right. And then I also wanted to mention, Ellie, I see that your hand is up. Give me just a second here. I did want to mention that you guys are all on mute by default. We will be using that Q&A button to answer any questions. So if you do end up having any questions, please focus those into that Q&A option down at the very bottom of your screen. Primarily, the reason why we use the Q&A is because it allows us to see all of the questions that others have asked, in addition to allowing me to kind of leave questions open in case it's something that we're going to be addressing a little bit later. So that'll be an easy way for us to keep track of who's asking what, make sure that all the questions are asked in an appropriate manner. Now the chat section, on the other hand, try to avoid posting any actual questions into the chat. Chat is where we're going to be adding in any anecdotes, stories, comments, anything that's not directly a question. So there may be some classes like our CMAs and Matrix class that we have tomorrow, where we're going to be asking for a lot of examples of things. But and then I also wanted to mention this class is going to be recorded. We'll be sending you guys a link after class is over. And then also, if you guys do end up having any audio or video issues during the course of this class, please make sure to let us know. Chat, Q&A, raise hand, doesn't matter. Let us know immediately so that we can try and get you guys corrected. And finally, since this is a CE credit class, I wanted to let you guys know that we do have the CE credit sent in to OREC by the end of the month. Since we only have classes at the beginning of this month, you guys should be resting assured that there is no way in heck that they're not going to get the CE credit sent to them in time. So you guys will be getting everything you need, and you should be good to go. All right. I did want to mention at least just a couple things about the buttons at the bottom of the screen. Again, chat down there, Q&A for any questions. The raise hand option is actually going to be how we interpret if you have a question that you would like to ask with your voice. So especially if you guys are on mobile, where you just have to tap the screen in order for those buttons to appear. If you do end up having a question you would like to ask, and typing it out on your phone is a little bit cumbersome, just hit that raise hand option. It can unmute you, and you can ask your question with your voice. And speaking of which, we do have a question real quick. There you go. There it goes. There you go, Ali. Oh, was this just a wave? Good morning. Oh, okay, that's my mistake. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the course content. Let me get this closed out. Excellent. All right. So we're going to go ahead and officially get started. Again, my name is Danny. I'm the MLS Training Director. I did want to let you guys know the class is an hour long. We should be done with class at 11. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the course content. It is 10:05. So everybody who is currently here, you guys will be eligible for CE credit. So let's actually start off with the basics of this. When you guys first get into the MLS portal, over on the right-hand side, or depending on how you guys have your screen set up, obviously, you guys should see a little link here for something called ShowingTime. Now, ShowingTime is going to be a digital showing scheduling service that you guys have access to. This is a member benefit that's being provided through the MLS. I did want to mention that we are going to be trying to transition in the near future to the SentryLock showing service. So there is a chance that you guys might not have access to ShowingTime for that much longer. But depending on what you guys are interested in and whether you guys would like to continue using this in the future, you will still have access to all of the features. In fact, you'll actually have access to more than just the features that we'll be describing today. If you do decide to continue using ShowingTime even after it's no longer a member benefit. But this is, as I mentioned on a lot of the advertising for this is the final time that we're going to be officially teaching the ShowingTime portion of this. And we will be subsequently teaching a showing service class in the future that's just going to kind of be device or system agnostic. So something that'll address both SentryLock and ShowingTime, or potentially if we do end up completely terminating our member or our contract with ShowingTime, we will just be teaching about the Sentry key system. But in the interim, every member has access to ShowingTime. ShowingTime was recently purchased by Zillow, which is part of the reason why they've inspired this move from one system to the other. And I did want to ask, before we get too far into the actual practical element of this, how many of you guys, just by show of hands, were using CSS before ShowingTime? So this was actually a couple of years ago that we, oh goodness, I apologize, not a couple of years ago, this was 3 years ago that we transitioned back in 2018. So just a couple of you guys, it looks like. And that makes sense. The CSS system, or centralized showing service, wasn't nearly as popular. It was also not particularly as easy or straightforward, I felt like. There were some things that were a little bit too simple and other things that were maybe not clear or didn't have a lot of nuance to them, so there wasn't really much you could do with it. ShowingTime, on the other hand, is trying to make sure that you guys have access to all sorts of different features and functions that are actually going to make sure that this all makes sense and that you guys are getting what you need to out of it. So to wit, let's actually go ahead and explore this. I'm going to click on the link here to ShowingTime, and it brings me to my home page. Now, depending on how frequently you guys have signed in, or if you guys have signed in ever, there may be a pop-up in the middle of your screen asking if you would like to review your profile. Now, on that home screen, there is the Edit Profile option. I'm going to click that now. If you guys click on the Review Your Profile option, it should bring you to the same place. So when you get in there, we're going to make sure that we've gotten all of our ducks in a row before we actually start discussing any of the practical functions. This will kind of give us a little bit of an introduction to some of those functions, but I do want to make sure that we've gotten everything lined up before we actually start trying to set up our listings, set up our showings, etc. So make sure that when you guys get into the profile, which you can also access by clicking your name down here at the bottom, you've got your first and last put in there correctly. Make sure that if you have a cell phone number put in, that you actually have it tagged as a mobile phone number. And if you do end up having another phone number that you would like to include, make sure that it is tagged with the proper phone type. In order for you guys to even receive text messages at all, you will need to make sure that one of these phone numbers is set up as the mobile phone. Now, I'm going to repeat this a little bit later when we start discussing the client's contact information, but it's important to recognize that unless a phone number has been tagged as mobile, it will not receive text message options. And in fact, actually, as we get down here a little bit further, you'll notice that there isn't even a text message option unless I have something tagged as the mobile phone. So make sure that that's all set up correctly. And down here under the text message option, there is the option to not send text messages at all. So even if you do have a mobile phone, you can actually choose to opt out of text messaging. But otherwise, if you guys are actually wanting to receive those text messages, which I would strongly recommend, set that up with your cell phone number that you've created up here. Now, a little bit further down, there is the linked profiles section. Now, one of the things with the linked profile section that we've noticed people do by accident is they'll actually try to get all of their team members or office members to actually get connected on each of each other's ShowingTime accounts. We strongly recommend not doing that. Primarily just because this My Linked Profile section is actually meant to allow you to connect with multiple MLSs, not multiple members within an MLS. So the idea behind this linked profile was to allow you to get the membership data from, or the listing data, excuse me, from a specific MLS and ensure that it's connected to your ShowingTime account. So that means if you guys do have multiple MLSs that you are a part of, so for instance, Oakmar, or if you guys are a part of the Northeast Oklahoma Board of Realtors, or someplace that's not using the same MLS data as us, then you guys can get that linked profile added on here so that whenever you have a listing, whether it's in one MLS or both, you can have all of the listing data from both MLSs compiled into one place so that you guys share a calendar for that particular listing, even if it is two separate listings, but one property. So if you guys do end up having that, there's the add profile option. It's fairly simple. Just make sure to choose what MLS you would like to connect it to, put in your information, and you're good to go. So again, just as a reminder, this My Linked Profiles is not meant to be used within the same MLS with different individuals. So don't try and set up your team members. It will break things. And we have had a couple calls in the past about that, and it was bad. And of course, what was worse is that we actually didn't know why it was happening. It was just something that was kind of tucked away on their linked profiles, and a lot of things were changing without them wanting it, so on. But now the listing agent showing preferences. This is something that we're going to be discussing a little bit more at the end of class. So I just wanted to point out, if this is your first time in ShowingTime, please make sure that this is set to no. The reason why we want to have this set to no is because once we start learning about what all these features and functions are, we can come back, we can switch this over to yes, and you guys should be good to go. Primarily, it's just because we want to make sure that you guys aren't accidentally setting this up without full knowledge of what exactly is going to be done here. A little further down, we do have some details about the buyer's agent information. I would double check this information once you guys have established everything else in the system. And in fact, that's actually what we're going to do. We're going to take a brief tour of the profile again after we've finished learning about what a lot of these functions are, just to ensure that you guys know what we're actually working with. Finally, down at the very bottom of the profile, there is a mobile app section. This allows me to send a link to myself. So I just put in my own email address here, send an authentication link. It's actually going to be sending two pieces of information. One is going to be a direct link that actually allows me to download the app. And then after I'm done with that, and I've got the ShowingTime app installed on my computer, then it actually has a second link that we can use that directly signs me into the app. One of the cool things about ShowingTime is that we don't actually have to have our own username. We don't have to put in a password ever. As it's still connected to the MLS, we're just going to be able to click on this link and dive directly into ShowingTime. Now on the phone, it's the exact same thing. All we need is just to make sure that we have the authentication link sent to ourselves. So just use whatever email address it is that you guys have on your device. Download the app, click on that second link, and you'll be connected. And as you guys can see, I've already got my phone connected here, my iPhone 10. But again, we're going to be coming back to review this and the calendar sync a little bit later. So let's head back to our home page. Make sure that if you guys do end up making any changes to this, which, speaking of which, I have my own fax number now, thankfully. You can save those changes and you're good to go. So save any of your changes before you leave, and let's head back to our home page. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention, and actually something that we don't see on my screen right now, if you guys do end up having a extra set of permissions within your account, so for instance, if you guys are admins, brokers, etc., you may notice that there's actually going to be a little bit different look to your homepage when you first get signed in. In order to make sure that we're all reviewing this on the same view, I do want to point out, let's switch this over to the agent view. And actually, I'm going to pull this up. So this is what it looks like if you guys are signed in as either an admin, a broker, or at some point had been given extra permissions in the system. So you'll notice that there is an office home, an agent home. Make sure if you are following along, and you guys don't have to follow along currently, but if you guys are following along even on the recording, make sure that you guys are following along from the agent home version. The office home, as you notice, has significantly less buttons and features. This is mostly just to give you guys a quick overview of what's happening in your office. Same thing goes with the agent setup and office setup. Those are things that you guys will only see when you guys are signed in as an admin. But we'll be doing everything from the agent home version. So let me move that off the screen. I'll need that again later. Perfect. All right. And notice again, agent home and office, or agent setup and office setup are both missing on this. This is just going to be from the training agent perspective. So just an account that's going to match everybody's permissions in the entire system. Now, from this homepage, again, we do have a quick link that allows us to get back into our profile if we need to make any adjustments to this, if we've got a new email address, whatever the case may be. That allows us to quick and easy access, the same as clicking on our name. We also have a section here for messages that shows any of the unread conversations. There is a whole section over here on the side that's just for messages. You can actually see this is going to be broken down by what listings that you guys have. At the moment, I don't have any listings that I've had conversations about, but just to show you guys what that looks like. Oh, and there it is. What you can do is actually have conversations about specific listings with individuals. So instead of actually having to maybe interrupt any text messaging conversations that you're having or email conversations that you're having, you can actually use the ShowingTime app as well as the ShowingTime interface here with the messages to have discussions that's specifically about any of the listings that you have and any showings in particular that you have. So these conversations are actually kept kind of separate from everything else that you're doing. And the notifications will actually be coming up specifically within the ShowingTime app, which makes it a lot easier to keep track of the conversation that you're having about any of the showings that you have coming up. Now, that's not a feature that a lot of people are using, so I'm not going to linger on it for too long, but it is quick and easy to access, and it's a great way to make sure that you guys have all the details you need about any of the showings that you're going out for. Now, speaking of any of the showings that you guys are going out for, there is a whole section for this on the homepage that allows us to see any of the confirmed appointments and not confirmed appointments. And you can click on those and find out what's happening. Ooh, give me just a second. And I wanted to point out something specific on here. When you guys are going through and seeing any of these that have not yet been confirmed, if you click on them, it will actually provide you a list of all of the appointments that have not yet been confirmed. And subsequently, you can dive into those listings, find out who the listing agent is, and get back in contact with them in case you need to validate with them, like, hey, I put in this request a couple of days ago. Can you verify for me what's happening with it, whether or not it's been approved, or what's happening with your seller, etc. And then any of the confirmed appointments, this is a quick and easy way to see any of the confirmed appointments for today, so I can find out what my plans are tomorrow, what's going to be happening tomorrow, and then any showings that I have scheduled in the future. Now, showings on my own listings are actually going to be separated out so that you don't have to worry about seeing showings that are mixed in with yours, where you're just needing to attend rather than actually be the host. And then finally, we have a section down here for feedback requests. We're going to be discussing the feedback requests. This is actually one of my favorite features within ShowingTime. is how there's the whole section here for just setting up feedback, collecting all of that information, sending it into your seller, printing off reports about it. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff that you can do with it, and we'll be discussing that in a bit here. All right, so now that we've gotten our homepage out of the way, let's talk about the most important thing. We don't have any showings set up on my listings quite yet, but I need to actually set up my listings in order to be shown. So over here on the left-hand side, we have our listing setup section. Now, if I needed to get back to my homepage, I've got a link here. My messages brings me to any of the conversations that I'm having about showings. Showings is just going to be a simple calendar option. We can break that down by on my listings, making new requests, any that I have requested already, and the showing cart, which we'll discuss a little later. But in order to actually get my listings set up in order to be shown, we need to use this listing setup option. So listing setup does have all of my listings that are specifically connected to me. It'll also keep track of any of the listings statuses. So as you can see, I've actually got one that's pending, another one that's pending in the Funk subdivision. We actually found a real subdivision in Guyman called Funk, which is great. But we have a fake listing here. I've already got an owner connected to it. So when I click on it, it'll show me some of the basic details about this particular property. You notice that it has the address up here at the top, the listing number here, and then some basic details as well as the photo from the listing data if there was a photo connected with it. A little further down, we have an archive option, which takes this listing and all of the data connected with it and just kind of puts it into a little holding pattern so that we don't have to see it as an active listing for me to edit. There's a merge option, which allows me to take this particular listing, whether it was maybe something that expired, the listing actually went to the termination of the original listing agreement, you renewed it, or whether you guys actually are a part of multiple MLSs and you want to have the same property that has two different listings, you can merge those two into one specific section that's going to have both the listing data from our MLS as well as the listing data from any of the other MLSs as well. So that if you do have somebody that clicks on that ShowingTime link in the Oakmar MLS, the OK MLS, or MLS OK, MLS OK. If you guys have somebody click on the link from their system, it'll automatically show you the same calendar that you have access to in our system, so that you don't end up accidentally having overlapping appointments if that's not what you want. Finally, we have a listing activity report, change log, and attachments. We're going to talk about the listing activity report a little bit later. The change log is really boring. It's just showing us what's happened with the listing, price increases, decreases, on market, off market, etc. That's boring. You guys can see that in Matrix. But the attachments section does allow us to add any attachments that we would like to distribute whenever somebody does actually schedule an appointment. So for instance, if you guys wanted to include maybe the property condition disclosures, or if there's some company documents that you wanted to include, or maybe you guys created a PDF with some of the showing instructions. So like if there's dogs on the property, how to handle them, if there's doors that need to not be opened, you can give clear indication of those. But we're also going to be seeing down here at the bottom a lot of access and showing instructions. So this may not be, you may not need to attach something like that, but I have seen that happen in the past. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But one of the cool things about how they have the attachments set up is that whenever you actually attach something to this, they do not see that information. So whoever it is that's going to be going out to doing the showing, they will not have access to any of the attachments until after their appointment has been approved. Now, that's actually what we're going to get to in this section right here that has up at the top showing time for the MLS, allow showing requests, yes or no. Now, if we set this to yes, that means that we're actually going to have the icon appear on the listing. So in this case, it's this guy right here. Grab that MLS number and show you guys what this looks like. Oh, is this a fake listing? I believe I may have set this up as a test listing in Matrix then. Yeah, actually, let me go to my pending listings and set one of these back up as active. I apologize. I thought that that was still showing in the system. Perfect. Okay. Let's edit this one instead. There we go. All right. So what we see here, let's update instructions. No, we'll deal with that in a second. What we're seeing here is that I've got allow showing agents to request appointments online. Again, yes or no is going to indicate whether or not we have access to that little link within Matrix. So whenever you guys are getting in here, there is a little link on here that allows us to see whether or not this is set up for showing time. Now, coincidentally, we do have an option to just set up with showing time anyway, but that's going to be related to the showing carts a little bit later. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But if I do end up wanting to have that little link here for showing time set up, I am going to have to set this to yes. And that's going to open up for all of the showing instructions to be delivered, for all of the information about this listing to be delivered, and for people to start scheduling showings for this particular listing. Now, what that means is that when we switch this over to yes, I'm going to have to go through and ensure that all of these instructions, all of these options have been set up properly and are ready to use. So let's start up from the top. We do have in-person or virtual appointments. If you do still have someone that's a little bit worried about COVID, especially now that this Delta variant is hitting a lot of people, you do still have the option to switch over to virtual appointments only. We also have the in-person appointments only for if you do have a client that doesn't want somebody wandering around the house with a camera, which is pretty much what the virtual appointments would end up being. Or you guys can leave it on the default, which I usually recommend to people, is just in-person and virtual appointments. This allows you to do either option. So if you have somebody that's still a little bit safety conscientious and is wanting to just do a virtual appointment, they can still establish that whenever they put in their request. Now, the showing instructions and showing restrictions sections are going to be where we establish all of the information that we need about our showing itself. And then we also have a separate section that you guys can go through that helps you visualize what showing restrictions you've set up. So that if you do have a client that says, I don't want to have any showings on Sundays, or I don't want to have any showings on Wednesday nights, that kind of stuff, you can actually establish those and help visualize that using the showing restrictions tab. So we'll explore that in a bit here. But before we do, let's make sure that all of our showing instructions are established first, starting off with our appointment type. Now, this is different than whether or not we're doing in-person or virtual appointments. What this is actually describing is whether or not we're going to require for an appointment to be established. That means that the permissions are actually going to be established in order for the whoever it is that we actually designate. I'll show you guys that in a moment here. They will actually be required to approve that appointment or not. Now, there are a couple options to allow for us to say, instead of just, every time somebody puts in a request, I have to go say yes or no, we do have the option to do courtesy call or go and show. And what this establishes is that anytime somebody puts in a request, it's automatically approved, and then you just get a note saying when it is that somebody's going to be coming out. And then finally, there's the even more hands-off version. So again, appointment required means that somebody has to request a time, and you say yes or no. Courtesy call or go and show means that somebody requests a time and it's automatically approved. The final option, view instructions only, is actually going to take just any request and just send them information. So effectively just a quid pro quo kind of thing. You send me your contact information, I send you my contact information and the showing instructions. You go out, you take a look at the property whenever you want. There is no time frame on the view instructions only. So oftentimes, whenever we do see people using this, it's going to be in relation to a vacant land listing or a listing that's not owner occupied. Now, I usually recommend people to use either the appointment required or the courtesy call go and show. Those are the two options that I think allow for a little bit more nuance to when people are going to be there as well. Because if you do end up using the view instructions only, the showing restrictions just become completely moot. There's no time frames that they're actually going to be requesting for. It's literally just show up, take a look at the property, and you're done. So let's start off with appointment required, because this is really the only one that you guys need to learn. The rest of these are going to be so much simpler to deal with that if you understand how the appointment required functions, the rest of them are just going to fall into place. Now, it does ask us whether or not we want to do a listing agent accompanied showing, so whether or not you will be there for this particular listing to be shown. I have mine set to no. This is the default. We do have a feedback template option. Now, we're going to be messing with some of these feedback templates a little bit later, but I'm going to leave mine on the default, which is the ShowingTime template. We'll take a look at that in a bit. Now, the contact section is the next section down. And remember, we set this as appointment required. And you notice there's a whole section here that's just specifically about who's going to be confirming the appointments. Now, by default, it's going to have myself added in here. And at the moment, I have the option to add in a text choice, an email option, or because I do have the mobile app already installed for myself, I do have the option to do push. This is actually a relatively common question that we get on the service desk. So just so you guys are aware, the push option is going to be push notifications. So literally just defining whether or not you're going to get a notification on your mobile app if you have the mobile app installed. So we'll end up getting calls from people saying, I don't have access to this checkbox. Why is that? And it's just because they don't have the mobile app set up. And again, we'll talk about how to do that in a bit here. Finally, we do have the showing voice option. So again, just to clarify what this section is actually checking for, this is actually going to define whether or not when someone has requested an appointment, who's going to be doing the confirmation. So I get a text, I get an email, push notification, or finally, we do have the option to get a showing voice call. Now, the showing voice is actually a service that's just an automated robot that just calls in and says, so-and-so is asking for an appointment at such and such time, at such and such property. Do you approve? That kind of thing. It's a little bit annoying. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but especially for those of you guys who are very frequently on the road, this actually might be a good idea so that you're not having to look down at a text message or an email or a push notification when you guys are out on the road. You can just put it over the speakers, answer yes or no, and you're done. Now, on the other side, we do have notify of confirmed or canceled appointments. So what this actually did is if we do end up approving an appointment, I will receive a second text that says it's been approved. Here's the confirmation. This is also how we're going to be contacted if there is any cancellations or declined appointments. So you'll notice that we do see text, email, push, just like we did before. But whenever we check the checkbox here for showing voice, instead of it just being a basic remote or robot phone call, we do have the choice between whether we want to get a phone call whenever an appointment is confirmed, declined, or canceled, or we can just switch this over to just when it's declined or canceled, which is what I recommend people to do. So even if you don't want to get the robot phone call whenever you have somebody request an appointment, I can't stress this enough. Do set it for whenever you guys have the notify of confirmed or canceled appointments, and make sure that when you check that checkbox, set it to the option decline and cancel calls only. Now, the reason why we're setting it up like this is because if I do end up, I've got this property is out in Kingfisher. I live in Tulsa. This is going to be at least a 3-hour drive to get out there. So it might be a good idea for me to know whether or not I've actually had somebody cancel the appointment on me. So if I get that showing voice phone call, when it's only going to be for declined or canceled calls, that way I'm not having to worry about being in my car, reading my text messages, emails, or push notifications on my phone. I'll actually get a phone call that'll tell me they've canceled the appointment. So strongly recommend to do that. Now, as we've been going through all of this, maybe you guys have noticed that this is all in relation to me as the listing agent. This is not necessarily ideal for everyone. And in fact, actually, whenever I was teaching this class, even all the way back in 2018, we would still constantly have people mention that, yeah, this isn't what I want. I want the owner to be the one that actually does this. That's why we have this option to add owner/occupant, or you can also even include a team member or a co-listing agent of some kind that's going to be doing any of this work instead or as well. So I'm going to choose to add in an owner. I can search for anybody that I've already established in my contacts, but as you can see, I don't have any. So I'm just going to go ahead and add someone instead. So John Cena. He is the owner. He is not the occupant. We'll make sure to give him a home phone number. 867-5309. I think that might be his wife, Jenny's number, but and then we also have the option to add in multiple phone numbers. It's important to recognize that at the moment, I don't have any text options on my screen. But if I do end up adding in a mobile phone number, you'll notice that I do have the checkbox here for use for text messages. So if we do end up setting up a phone number, I'm not going to bother putting in a real one this time. There we go. We can use that for text messages. But again, if we don't have that set as a mobile phone number, notice no text message options will pop up. I love that you do have the option to add in a pager and a fax number, just in case you're working with a client stuck in 1999. So I've got all of his contact information put in. I made sure that I have him tagged with a mobile phone number. There we go. And now I actually have the option to either text him. Email is not available because I did not add an email account. Push is not available because John didn't give me an email, which means that he can't even install the app and actually connect it to me. But you do have a effectively a seller version of ShowingTime that allows for that push notification. And again, John also has the option to get the robot phone calls or to just not get any phone calls at all. Now, if you do end up setting up the showing voice for one or both of the individuals, you do have the option to choose who gets called first. So for instance, if I have both of them set up, I get to choose if John's going to be the first one to get phone calls or if I'm going to be the first one. And we just switch that by clicking these up and down. Now, once we have John set up, if I wanted to, I can actually completely disengage myself other than to maybe get an email confirmation that John had a showing at his property or something like that. So if you don't end up wanting, like if you do end up wanting that hands-off experience where the seller is primarily doing the majority of the work about the showings, then you can set that up so that he gets a text, phone call, and then the only thing I have to see is just he's done an approval, and I get a phone call in case there's been a cancellation. Now, in case any of this is a little bit confusing, there is the option down here at the bottom, how will this work? That lets you know kind of a blow by blow what's going to be happening. So you see what happens when an appointment is made, after the appointment is confirmed, or if it's canceled, and you can see all of the steps all the way down. So it makes it nice and easy to make sense of what you've set up, just in case you need to explain it to your client as well. And then there's a trash can and an edit option. So if we needed to come back in here and actually set up an email address for him, there we go. You can save that. And now I've got my email option. And then if he ends up setting up the app, the ShowingTime for sellers, he will have that push option turned on so that we can actually also send him the push notifications. Now, all of this is going to be pretty simple for the owner and occupant. We also have the option to add in a co-listing agent. You can search in either my office, my MLS, or all nearby MLS members. But usually I just restrict myself to the office, do a search for Ethan, my coworker, and set him up. And notice he's already got all of his contact information put in there, and he just gets text messages, showing voice, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty easy. This is great for if I'm on vacation, I can just turn off all of these, set him up, and then that way they're taking care of all of that together. So John and Ethan can work together while I'm away, and then as soon as I get back, delete Ethan, and it's back to just me. Good to go. All right. Now a little further down, we have the showing restrictions. We actually had a special request. I think I'm asked earlier if any of you guys previously used CSS. There was only a couple people, but the CSS system used to have a minimum appointment length, and ShowingTime only had the maximum appointment length. Because this was actually a common enough request, especially after ShowingTime purchased CSS, they did actually add in this function for us so that you can now actually establish a minimum appointment and maximum appointment length. You can choose whether or not to do overlapping appointments, whether there's buffer time needed, and then there's a section down here that shows any upcoming restrictions. But we're going to actually take a look at the showing restrictions from the calendar section up here at the top in a bit here. So in the interim, though, I did want to point out the advanced notice section. This is actually an important section for you guys. We do have the option to switch between no same-day appointments. So for instance, if your seller wants to have at least a day worth of lead time, you can check that checkbox, and then you will not be able to schedule an appointment today, but tomorrow will be completely open-ended. Now, we do have the option instead, if you guys want to have appointments that are going to be established today, and you just want to make sure that there's at least some lead time. Like in my case, again, Kingfisher is far away. So I'm going to actually put in that I have to have 3 hours. Now, there is a required option and a suggested option. So if I set this up where it's 3 hours, it's going to say that it's 10:41 right now. So at 10:45 plus 3 hours, so that'd be 1:45, that'd be the soonest someone could actually establish an appointment. Now, it does have a suggested lead time of 4 hours, which means that, all right, the soonest that someone could get a appointment scheduled would be within the 3 hours at 1:45, but the suggested lead time is giving me at least that little bit extra option to ensure that, all right, if you do end up trying to establish an appointment at, let's say, 2, there will be a notice that says we may not be able to do this appointment, but you can still put in your request. So that way people understand that, all right, I'm putting it in for a time frame that may not actually work, but the good news is that they'll at least let me establish it, and I can just find out the hard way whether or not it gets approved or not. So I usually like setting these to something realistic, especially if it's something that you're near to. In my case, since this is so far away, it has to be something relatively extreme. But even if you guys just wanted to set it for, an hour of suggested lead time, so yeah, you can set it up for the next hour, but it might not happen. You can set those up. So play with those at your leisure. Let's now talk about how we're going to actually have people access the system or access the property. Now there's 2 different sections down here at the bottom that are empty. And then there's the driving directions, which is obviously being imported directly over from my test listing, which I ended up getting. One of my other test listings had a photo on it and some fake information in there. And I still had somebody reach out to me and says, is this actually for sale? And I'm like, this is literally what all of the sections say that I could put text in. I don't understand how to make this more clear that it's a test listing. Even the photo was test listing. Anyway, just funny to come across that. But let's talk now about our access information. So at the very top of the access details, we have a section here for gate codes. So you can put in a gate code in case there's a gated neighborhood that they live in. We also have a section here for how will the agent access the home. It's a drop-down that includes all of the different kinds of varieties of access methods, going all the way back to the combo boxes, Sentry Lock, Supra Box, whatever you guys happen to be using. So I'm going to choose this Sentry Lock option. You can put in the serial number. You notice none of these sections are actually required. But what I would recommend that you guys think of as required is the location section. Location section is actually going to define where it is that this box is located. And in case you guys haven't been given this little tidbit, I would very, very, very much recommend it if you guys are going to be using any lock boxes at all, Supra, Sentry, doesn't matter. Think of it the same way as those old combo boxes where you actually like drill it into the outside of the house. Put a bike chain around a pole, lock it to something, even if it's not the door handle. Like just make sure that it's somewhere that's going to be easy to find if somebody's looking for it, but also not as easy to spot if you guys are driving by. It doesn't happen too often, but occasionally we will have these lock boxes kind of pick up and walk away. So if you lock them, or if you only ever put them out whenever somebody's going to be coming to visit, it makes it a lot more likely that you'll be able to keep that lockbox forever instead of having to lose it and find it in a dumpster completely destroyed with the key still inside, because Sentry lock boxes are pretty great. You do have a section here for the call before showing code. That's what that CBS stands for. It's not going to be codes for TV shows. Call before showing codes are fairly handy. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using those on everything, but it does make it easier for the client if they do end up going out there and for some reason their phone is dead or there's other problems involved. If they still have that call before showing code on them, they can still get into the lockbox. Access notes is just a generalized area to put in extra details. And if you notice, access notes is still going to be available even if you don't put in lockbox, combo box, anything. Now, the alarm details section, you just switch this over to yes if there is an alarm, and it provides you 4 spaces. So disarm, arm, passcode, and then the alarm notes, which can be something as important as hold the pound key. Wait, pound key is the, there we go. This was actually the example that they gave us when they were first introducing us to the software. Apparently, the person that was actually teaching the class was formerly an agent, and she had to do a showing one time where the alarm did not get disengaged, and it was primarily because the seller had not told them that the alarm had to be held down for a certain amount of time in order for it to disengage, so that you didn't need to just know the arm and disarm codes. You actually had to do something separate, something extra. So that's an easy way for you guys to put that extra information in there. I'm going to leave that on no. Then finally, we get to our showing instructions. Now, this is the section that you guys are probably most familiar with. So a lot of these extra details are things that would normally be included in the showing instructions. But instead, since we have separate areas for those where we can define all of their information, the showing instructions are just going to boil down to the basics of how you guys are going to be interacting with the property. Now, one of the cool things about this is beyond just being able to type, we do also have the option to add from predefined notes. Now, what's really nice about this is that whenever I click on add from predefined notes, it's just a bunch of checkboxes next to commonly used things. Now, we have had a couple things that we've requested for them to add on here. They subsequently haven't added all of them. I think they did add one of them. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was pet related. But anyway, I would recommend that you guys look through these, find out which ones you guys are probably going to be using the most, or if you have a client that asked for something specific, you can always put those on. I notice it just adds that to the end of my text. If I type in anything else and go back and add in a different checkbox, again, it just adds it to the end. And then any of the text that it did actually put in there, you do also have the option to change. So for instance, if we wanted to add in a couple of the pet options, lizards are in the basement, tigers are in the garage, and dogs are loose in the yard. There. By the way, this actually happened in real life in, I think it was Texas. Somebody found a tiger in there in a vacant house's garage. It was alive, surprisingly enough. Anyway, so we've got all this information set up and ready to go. So I'm going to hit Save Changes. Now let's talk about our showing restrictions. Now the showing restrictions that we have on here, it does have something that's appearing on here. That's new. I'm going to delete that. Oh, it doesn't allow me. I haven't messed with this minimum appointment length option yet, so I'm going to actually remove that just so we can see this. Interesting. I'm going to have to ask them why I'm seeing that, but that's okay. So when we get in here, you guys should see an empty calendar, and there will be a section down here at the bottom that shows any of your upcoming restrictions. Now that's going to be the same section that you guys saw in the showing instructions, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click on this Add New Showing Restriction. This is going to allow me to add in any restrictions. I can either do a timed restriction. So for instance, if I want to make sure that nobody's able to set up an appointment before, let's say noon, I can set that up, and I can set it up for just any specific day, Or I can actually set this up to be a repeating restriction. And I just have to choose which days it is that needs to happen on, choose when that date is going to start, and when that date is going to end. So whenever you put in your showing restriction, it'll actually say that no one can actually schedule an appointment any weekday before noon. Now, as I clicked this Save Showing Restriction option, it said that the restriction reason is required. This restriction reason up here at the top, just so you guys are aware, is something that's actually going to be fed over to people before they've established their appointment. So I would recommend that you leave this something vague. So just say something like no show or something like that. Just keep it really basic, really simple, so that they have that set up. There we go. Oh, I see what it did here. So what it's doing is it's actually establishing a no-go zone just because of the appointment length. That's really interesting. Now you can do this in tandem with other showing restrictions. So you can actually go through and say, obviously I wouldn't recommend putting church on there, but if we just wanted to say, all right, Sundays, let's say they go to a Baptist church, so 3 p.m. Sunday, there we go. Perfect. So now I can see that visualized on here. So I don't have anybody that can establish an appointment before 3 p.m. And if you do end up needing to come back and take any of these away, you can hit those little trash cans. And again, that's all going to be on the basic showing instructions here, where you can get rid of that as well. Now, I also wanted to point out, all of this can be edited from the mobile version. There are some restrictions on some of the more nuanced things like these confirming appointments, but you can still always go back and make changes to the appointment restrictions from your mobile device, whether you guys signed into ShowingTime on the browser or whether you guys actually set up the app itself. All right, so I've got this all set up. So now if somebody does try to actually establish an appointment for this particular listing, they click on that ShowingTime icon. We just say, I'm going to be showing my own listing, schedule a single showing, and you'll see those time frames actually blocked out. So notice Monday through Friday, we've got those time frames blocked out until noon. And then we also have our Saturday completely open, and Sunday is blocked out until 3. And actually, I think I set up the suggested time frame too short. Let me do 3 hours instead. Yeah, let me try that one more time. Training agent. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And actually, I just wanted to illustrate this for you guys. On the appointments, whenever you guys are actually setting up the appointments for this particular, or for any listing, you see how there's the blocked out portions here. Whenever I click on this, reason, no show. Whenever I click on this gray area though, or even just hold my cursor over it, in fact, you have requested an appointment time that may be too soon for us to confirm. Although this may be difficult to set up on such short notice, we will make every effort to accommodate your request. So when you click on that, it reads the same information. You can select a different time or continue to actually set up your appointment. Now remember, I set mine up so that it actually doesn't have a minimum showing appointment now. Previously, if I left that half an hour option on, it would literally only say 12 to 12:30. So the first appointment option would be here. That'd be my appointment end time. So that's about it for scheduling the appointments as well as setting up the appointments. Now let's say that we're actually looking at an appointment or a property that actually had appointments on it previously. So I'm going to head back to my listing setup. Let's take a look at a property that actually had some property or some showings on it. And I'm going to go to this listing activity report. Now the listing activity report shows me any of the previous listings for this property. You can see all of these past showings and any of the feedback that was requested and provided by any of these individuals. So I can see at this point, I had apparently gone out to show this training agent's listing. I have not made this available to the homeowner, and I can see the answers to this particular showing down here, all of the feedback answers. fence needs repairs, blah, 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 blah. I can publish this out so that the homeowner has access to this either through their app, or if you guys do end up wanting to send a report to the client. But there's also a couple other options when we're looking at the listing activity report that I wanted to cover over here on the left. Now, the homeowner's version is only going to show that there was appointments that were done and any of the published feedback. We can change our date range in case we wanted to expand this out. I usually leave mine set to the default, which is just all of the above. I usually prefer that. We do have some display options where we can turn certain portions of this off. I don't usually recommend messing with that, but we do have an add activity option. This is going to be especially important if you have somebody that calls in and says that they actually want to do an appointment, but they don't want to use ShowingTime. That's totally fine. I understand. All you would have to do is just come into the listing setup, choose the property that you're working with, and then click on that listing activity report where you'll have this add activity option. So we choose what kind of showing it is, whether it's a showing, second showing, virtual tour, blah, 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 blah. We set what date it was, what time they're actually going to be coming out. We'll do 3, 2, 4. There we go. And then I'm going to put in an agent's name. Let's do Brumberich. There we go. So now we show our showing agent, and we can also add in notes, scheduled by phone. And I can even request the feedback. So even if they don't want to establish the showing themselves, we can still get all of their information put in, make sure that this time frame is blocked out so that if I chose not to have overlapping appointments, it's not going to allow for somebody to schedule while I already have somebody going out there. And then I just hit save. He's going to receive that email notification about the feedback after the appointment has ended at 3:30. So immediately after the appointment is over, he receives a feedback request and he can let us know what that property was like. Now, to get the feedback sent off to clients, we do have an email report. We can add the attachments, print off the report, or even download a PDF that includes all this information. But I do want to actually mention this send notification option is another great way to reach out to anybody that's actually come out to take a look at the property. And you can even choose who you're going to be sending that request out to with this update option. We can even add in additional email addresses if need be. So if you guys have a price increase, if there's maybe some of the repairs were finally done, fence was repaired. Bring your seller back or your buyer back. There we go. We can send that all out and it's good to go. So again, all of this is under the listing activity report for whatever listing you guys happen to be looking at. So if you do end up wanting to reach out to somebody or even set up a new showing for someone that's not willing to participate in the digital side of this, and actually let's just assume best intent. Maybe you have somebody that says, oh, can we come out and take a look at the property at such and such time? Perfect. Add activity and you're good to go. And you can do this from mobile as well. Now let's finally talk about our feedback options. There's really not too much to discuss on this, but whenever you click on feedback, it'll show you any of the feedback that you've either done on your own listings. So people have responded to my feedback. I can review those here. It shows it for last month by default, or any of the listings that I've shown. So for instance, this is an easy way to keep track of any of the showings that you've done yourself and you kind of want to find out whether or not you liked something or not. But there's also the form design and settings option. This is where we can show up and actually take the feedback form and kind of customize it for ourselves. Now there is the option to create a new template. What this does is it actually creates a completely blank template. But what I would recommend that you guys do, similar to how we do this in Relist, where there's that general query that we use to create our search functions, this works the same way. It gives us a ShowingTime template. And if I hit clone, I'm actually going to have the option to give it a new name. We'll do Kingfisher address. There we go. Save changes. And what this has now done is it's actually taken the basic ShowingTime form and turned it into something that I can now change. Now, in addition to just some basic, text that we're including on this, The feedback form itself is where we can define any of the questions that we want to have answered. So how do they like the property? We can add in multiple choice questions of our own now. Is the fence a deal breaker? Yes. Add in another option. No. There we go. Save my changes. Template has been updated. Head back to your listing setup. So if you do end up having one that you set up for a specific property, make sure that you come back and actually apply that under this feedback template option to include that Kingfisher option. So then tomorrow, whenever Bromberg is done with his showing of the house, he's going to receive this specific feedback request at 3:30 when he's done with his showing. So that's about it. Just as a reminder, make sure to come back here to the training or the profile section. Any of your showing preferences you can actually establish in advance of your listings being added into the system, so that if you do end up switching this over to yes, all of your listings that you get added into Matrix will automatically have the following settings applied to them. So it makes it really easy to just kind of do a little bit hands-free for this. And then finally, the calendar sync option. You do have the option to add this into your Gmail calendar, your Outlook calendar, whatever. That's all under the profile along with your mobile app access. But we're officially done with class today, so thank you guys so much for joining us. If you do end up having any questions or problems, I'm going to leave the session running for another few minutes here until we see those kind of peter out. But if you guys do end up having any questions afterwards, we do actually have the, oh, where did my video go? We do actually have the training taught to all of our staff as well. So if you do have questions about ShowingTime, just give us a call and we can actually answer those questions on the service desk. Pull that up, there we go. Excellent. So I've still got ShowingTime open. So if you guys do end up having any questions that you would like to ask right now, we'll just leave this session open for a little bit. But thank you guys again for joining us. Oh, sounds good, Pat. I'll make sure to send that to your Gmail. And yesterday I did try to send the recording to both of your email addresses just to make sure whether or not you were still getting emails just from us in general, because I think it might just be Zoom that's being blocked by Coldwell Banker. I'm still not sure why that is, but it's something that you may need to mention to them. Oh, and Amanda, yes, there should be some help and support. And yeah, under the mobile section, there's actually a whole bunch of articles and videos and stuff like that on how to actually use the mobile version of ShowingTime. This is actually where I learned about all of those functions and features. Oh, even the recording, Pat? That's disappointing. But yeah, I'll make sure that we send it to both. Man, Coldwell Banker is really unusually restrictive about their emails coming through. That's really bizarre. But that's okay. Yeah, not to worry. All right. Oh, and Anne, actually, I apologize. I see your question. Under broker remarks, you've requested that they must call you for showings. Do we need to select no for the online request? Yes, that's exactly correct. And actually, so it's worth mentioning, if you guys do have there's some listing that you don't want to have access in ShowingTime, just set that to no. And again, you do have the option to do that on a listing by listing basis, even if you do end up having this established so that you have all of your listings come in new with yes. And then if you'd only like to have the property shown between 9 and 8, you can make the, yes, and actually that's exactly correct. So for instance, if they don't want to have any appointments in the morning, like really early in the morning, if you come into the listing setup, make sure that you set up under your showing restrictions that you don't want it to be shown in the very early morning. So just add a showing restriction. No morning showings. Set up the, and of course, hardly anybody ever actually requests that early, but just to make sure, we can always put it in so that nothing before 9. Yeah, that's a good question. Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys again for joining us today. I'm going to leave it open for just another minute here in case anybody else has a question, need some clarification on anything, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. Well, and actually, it looks like we're dwindling down enough. So again, if you guys do end up having any questions or problems outside of our little webinar session here today, just give us a call over at the service desk or send us an email. We got our phone systems back up again, thank goodness. So we're back up and running. Here to field your questions. Have a good one, guys. Stay safe, and hopefully I'll see you guys in future training.